Chapter 27-22, Insecure about losses and gains. 4. Mu Feng and his men understood the consequences, so they respected Di Fui's decision. Meanwhile, all of the invaders had fled, leaving the Starry Crescent land in its post-war state. All the citizens took up a role in order to rebuild their homes from scratch. Gu Shijiu and Di Fui then returned to the former residence of the Lord, the Biwu Palace. The 4 messengers joined them, along with the Muscle and Lu Wu. As for Kun Xueyi and his companions, they were all assigned with different tasks and were sent away. Gu Shijiu wanted to take Di Hao along, but the child was suddenly interested in Yun Yanli and was determined to follow the man. Di Fui knew that everything that the boy chose to do came with a purpose. He asked no further questions and let the boy go. Yun Yanli could not keep the boy away, so he was forced to take him along. Everything in the Biwu Palace was well maintained. It was as if Di Fui had never left. The patterns that he painted on the foldable screens and the wood carvings that he personally created all re-emerged after their long absence. Every little detail was restored. Gu Shijiu naturally swept her fingers across the surface of the folding screen to feel its texture. It was her favorite landscape painting. She sighed at the sight of the re-emergence of the painting and said, "Fui, when you were immortalized, even the painting went away with you. When I first escaped the Forbidden Land, I was the only one who remembered about you, so I needed proof to tell others about your existence, but there was nothing I could find." The tone of her voice was rather mellow as the ghosts of her past had come back to haunt her once more. Di Fui knew how much pain she must have been through all those years, so he took her hand and comforted her. "It is all in the past now. I am here now, and I will never leave again." He took her to the garden for a walk, away from the unpleasant past. They strolled past an artificial hillock, and she stopped walking all of a sudden. Gu Zijia's face turned pale at the sight of the fake mound. "What is the matter?" Di Fui did not quite understand. "That is where you were immortalized. I saw the messengers soaked in tears over there," Gu Shijiu murmured. Di Fui was quite surprised. He, too, remembered the place, so he knew that she was right. However, he did not understand how she knew about it. Shouldn't she have been in the Forbidden Land when the immortalization took place? "I had a dream when I was still in the Forbidden Land that you were immortalized. I was frightened to death and could not even run straight. I kept telling myself that it was only a dream and that you would still be there, waiting for my return. I thought you were still waiting for me to bring you the herbs and save your life." Gu Shijiu wanted to chuckle, but she began to choke with tears. Di Fui pulled her into his arms and kissed her softly on the lips. "Let's not think about it. Let's forget it all." "How can I not think about it?" Gu Shijiu protested. "After everything that has happened, I still cannot find the courage to visit this place. I am scared that your existence is still imaginary. Perhaps, everything that happened in the Shura world was only a dream. Maybe none of it actually happened." She put her arms around his waist and buried her head in his chest. "I am still terrified." Like a child that had been burnt before and dreaded fire, she became very insecure about her losses and gains, which was different from her strong, usual self. Di Fui was equally touched and sorrowed by the depths of her love that brought about the insecurities. He pinched her nose and asked, "Can't you feel my presence right now?" Gu Shijiu took a long sniff and immersed herself completely in his scent. She knew that she was acting way too insecure. However, her insecurities were not something she could control. Ever since their reunion in the Starry Crescent land, she had never left his side. She knew that she would panic in his absence. Even when she was sleeping, she had to hold on to his sleeves just to be sure that he was still around. There was one time when she woke up without him. In a flurry, she quickly went around everywhere looking for him. If he had not returned in time, the entire place would definitely have been ransacked. Her melancholic sentiments and insecurities perfectly summed up her current emotions. Gu Shijiu knew that it was not her usual self, but she could not help it. She knew that pregnant women would often get emotional and become anxious, so she thought that the fluctuations must be due to her pregnancy. Di Fui was a knowledgeable man, but not when it came to his wife's pregnancy issues, so he believed everything she told him. Therefore, he would take her around wherever he went just to make her feel better. He would also avoid going to places that would trigger her flashes of memory about her unhappy past. He thought that the richness of spiritual energy in the Biwu Palace would help to calm her mind. To his dismay, things were quite the opposite. He took her to the room and lay her onto the bed and said, "Sleep. You are tired. You have to stay with me," she insisted while pulling his sleeve. "All right, I will be here at all times," he reassured. He lay down by her side and hugged her. "Sleep. Will you leave?" "Of course not. When you wake up, I will still be here." With the reassurance, Gu Shizhou closed her eyes and slowly dozed off. Di Fui observed her and noticed that she was not sleeping very well. Soon, her face seemed to be drenched in sweats. Her hands were reaching out everywhere for him, so Di Fui had to grab her hands in a way that she was familiar with so that she could calm down. The situation had been ongoing for almost a month now. He started to think if it was really normal. Di Fui did not find her overdependence annoying. In fact, he liked that she needed him. It was the change in her character that he found odd. Di Fui regularly examined her pulse. Everything was fine. After a while, he covered her up in the blanket and went outside. "Find me a few midwives who are experienced," he gave an order to Mu Feng, who was there guarding the door. Chapter 27-23, Seek Her Salve. Where she gets her sore. Mu Feng was dumbstruck by the sudden request. "Midwives?" Di Fui proceeded to place his hand around Mu Feng's shoulder in an authoritative manner. "Any problem?" Mu Feng quickly explained, "Nothing." "My lord, why do you need midwives here?" "They are all mortals, so they cannot enter this place." He had a point. Di Fui then answered, "They do not have to come here. Find me a few midwives so that I can ask them some questions." Mu Feng was really curious but took the order and did as told. It had been a difficult journey for the Lord to return here. Mu Feng still found his Lord's presence a bit surreal and hard to believe, like a dream that would disappear the next day. The 4 messengers agreed to guard the area so that they could keep an eye on the Lord to make sure that he was real. Mu Feng was undoubtedly effective in his search. In 2 hours, he managed to find over 20 midwives of different ages and experiences. All of them were gathered in one of the many halls of the Biwu Palace. Di Fui was still in the room with Gu Shizhou. He lighted up an incense stick and swirled it around the room so that its fragrant odor could fill the air and make her sleep better. After everything was in place, he left the room and proceeded to the hall to meet his guests. The midwives had never thought that they would be able to meet the Lord one day. When Di Fui showed up, all of them were so dumbstruck in astonishment that they could not even speak properly. Luckily, they had not forgotten about their expertise. They were ready to help in any way that they were needed. However, Di Fui only needed them to answer one question: what are the emotional changes that a pregnant woman might encounter? The midwives were a little nervous at first, as they were unsure of why they were needed here. They were relieved when Di Fui got the ball rolling with a question. They had encountered many pregnant women and dealt with their emotions, mostly daily, so they answered based on their own experience. From the way they explained their encounters, Di Fui realized that each pregnancy was different. Some women experienced no emotional fluctuations, while others became completely different from who they were. The ones that were generally quiet prior to getting pregnant might become suspicious or even hysterical. Some women became depressed and suicidal. There were so many different causes, but they all led back to the same conclusion: it was normal for a pregnant woman to be emotional. Having listened to their stories, Di Fui was finally relieved. It seemed like Zijia's changes were really due to her pregnancy. Being sensitive was one of the symptoms. "What should I do to make my pregnant wife feel better?" he sincerely asked. The midwives looked at each other in consternation. Men would not usually care about their wives' emotions, especially if they were pregnant. In fact, they would be irritated even by the slightest change. In most cases, they would abandon their wife and look for a good time with their concubines. Only a few of them actually cared about their pregnant wife's feelings. It was rare to find a man who was willing to put in the effort to make his pregnant wife feel better. They were especially surprised when the concern was coming from the Lord, who was always known to be mighty and superior. They felt a closer connection to him all of a sudden. He seemed quite down to earth at that moment. The midwives offered him every advice that they could think of. For example, they told him to be present, to talk to her more often, and to do things that she loved to do. Most of the pregnant women would also become picky with food, so they suggested that he prepared her favorite foods for her. As long as she felt loved by her husband, her insecurities would slowly fade. Chapter 27-24, Seek Her Salve Where She Gets Her Sore. 2. Xueyi was enlightened by the useful pieces of advice given to him. When he was satisfied, he asked Feng to pay them some money and let them go. In order to prevent them from spreading the news about Gu Zijia's pregnancy, Xueyi cleared their memory of the events of the day, so they no longer remembered that they had seen the Lord. He managed to get what he needed to know, so there was no more time to lose. He quickly returned to the room as he was worried that Gu Shizhou might become distraught with anxiety once she saw that he was not there. The whole process took him only an hour. When he got back into his room, he was relieved to see that Gu Shizhou was still sleeping soundly on the bed. He walked out of the room and was surprised to see Feng by the door, standing straight like a wooden pole. Xueyi was slightly baffled. In fact, he never requested any of them to guard the doors in the Biwu Palace. Usually, the 4 messengers would be occupied by their own tasks and paperwork. Their workload was even greater than the president of a country. There should not be any free time for them to do something so pointless, like guarding a door. They would usually show up only when Xueyi asked for their presence. Why did he keep seeing Feng this time? Did Gu Shizhou change some rules when she became the Lord? Feng bowed before Xueyi as soon as he walked out of the door. Are you really so free? Xueyi through him glared at him as he asked. Feng blushed crimson with embarrassment. After years of working with Xueyi, he definitely understood what Xueyi meant by that. I am worried, he said after a pause. Feng finally found the courage to tell Xueyi how he felt. Master, actually, we all know why Lord Gu is acting this way. Pregnancy may not be the only reason. Tell me more. All of us are the same. We are all insecure. Master, when you called us the other day, we could not have believed it was you if you had not scolded us the way that you always did. Frankly speaking, we were all so happy. Lei was laughing like a madman while rolling on the ground. Yun kept slapping his face to make sure that he had not misheard your voice. Dian first started laughing, then, he started sobbing uncontrollably. I was so happy that I circled the place a few rounds and accidentally walked straight into a pillar. My forehead was left with a big bruise. Everyone else in Tianju Hall thought that we went crazy. He recalled the incident and shook his head. Master, we have all been waiting for your return for far too long. There were long, depressing days, which made the reunion even more exciting and meaningful for us. But the truth is that the long despair has also scarred us with insecurities. To be honest, we still thought that it was only a dream even after you called us and reassured us that you were back for good. It all felt like a dream that would go away eventually. When we saw you walking out of that spaceship, we finally believed that it was true. Master, we still feel insecure. Even though we are here with you and can clearly see that you are doing fine, we are worried that you might disappear again. Among the guardians, we agreed to take turns and guard the doors here. Master, if it is difficult for us, it must be even more difficult for Lord Gu. When you were immortalized, none of us remembered you, but she did. She looked into every corner of the place just to feel your presence again. Chapter 27-25, Seek Her Salve Where She Gets Her Sore. 3. She searched everywhere, from heaven all the way to earth. Whoever she met, whether she knew them or not, she would ask if he or she remembered you. She visited the royal administrative centers and looked into every archive to find a record of you, but no one remembered you. Everything about you had mysteriously disappeared. I still vividly remember the look of utter despair on her face. She looked like she had just been abandoned by the entire world. Di Fui clenched his fists. Gu Shijiu had never mentioned anything about these painful encounters to him. Even when she did, she would only brush lightly over the subject. He never knew that it took her so long to forget about him. He could clearly picture her in a frantic search. The despair she must have suffered evoked a sense of pain in his heart as well. Mu Feng continued, none of us understood her. All of us thought that she had gone hysterical, or was perhaps possessed by something evil. We wanted to help her, but she was always busy looking for you. One time, she went out to the sea and returned without any memory of you. However, she did not get any better. She was like a woman without a soul. Nothing could spark joy in her anymore. She was just like a lifeless jade statue. As a lord, her mood was able to affect the weather of the entire continent. So, for a while, the starry crescent land was covered in ice and snow all year round. The people were deprived of their means of survival because of the unnatural chance. Eventually, she found a way to go to the upper bound and stayed there for 6 months. She looked better after that. Master, Lord Gu cares for you way too much. After the painful loss, it is only natural that she becomes so paranoid about losing you again. Master, what she suffers from is the anxiety within her mind. One must seek her salve where she gets her sore. Give her time, maybe, she will become stronger. Di Fui agreed with a nod. When Gu Shijiu woke up, Di Fui was quietly reading by her side. The warm rays of sunlight went through the window and brightened up the room with a cozy late afternoon vibe. There were peace and solace all around her. It was always a peaceful time whenever he was around. She was slightly caught in a state of bewilderment when she woke up, which Di Fui noticed. As soon as she opened her eyes, he instantly looked away from his book and said, "Baby, are you awake?" Gu Shijiu sat right up and said, "I slept for a little too long." "You must have been very tired. I am happy that you could get some sleep." Di Fui then closed his book and asked, "Are you hungry? I can make you whatever you want to eat." Gu Shijiu was astonished. "When did you learn to cook?" With a slight pause, Di Fui smiled at her. "There is nothing difficult about cooking. As long as I am willing to do it, what can possibly stop me? This is the time for you to have a completely new appraisal for me. Would you like to try my cooking?" "Yes," Gu Shijiu exclaimed. She no longer needed food, but she would love to have some comfort food, especially when she was pregnant. "What do you want to eat?" "Fish." Di Fui nodded. "All right, let's go and get some fish." The glorious red sun descended in the west. Orange tints suffused the blue horizons, creating a picturesque contrast of colors. Baffled, Gu Shijiu was sitting on a roll of clouds that Di Fui had cast to transport them away. All she wanted was to eat some fish, but he certainly did not have to go all the way to the sea to get it. Somehow, the place looked somewhat familiar. "Shijiu, do you remember this place?" "Yes, the Crystal Palace is right under the water," Gu Shijiu answered swiftly. However, her face turned a little pale at the sight of the blue water. The ghosts of her past had come back to hit her again. Naturally, she started pulling his sleeve. Chapter 27-26, Seek Her Salve Where She Gets Her Sore. 4. Di Fui took her hand and dived right in. "Let's go and have a look." Di Fui was at the peak of his kung fu and spiritual power prowess, so diving into the sea was no longer a problem for him. Meanwhile, Gu Shijiu stayed within the wizardry barrier that he had created and did not get wet at all. The Crystal Palace still looked the same, it was as majestic and ethereal as ever. Di Fui and Gu Shijiu walked into the Crystal Palace, hand in hand. Little stones of amber and jade paved their way in. Soon, they came across a big stone that was carved all over with Di Fui's name. Every stroke of every word was so deeply carved onto the solid surface, which clearly showed how anxious she was when she made those marks. She was desperate to make the words stay. "You made those marks, didn't you?" Di Fui asked. Gu Shijiu cleared her throat before responding, your names would always disappear right after I carved them. I refused to believe it, so I frantically carved every surface that I could find, but none of them lasted. Now they are here. In fact, they are all over the place. She described it with a calm face, but deep down, a myriad of thoughts filled her heart. Di Fui held her hand and said, tell me the details. Share everything with me. I want to know what happened after I was immortalized. Gu Shijiu was a little reluctant. Those were the times that she did not want to relive. However, since Di Fui looked serious about his question, she decided to comply and shared her side of the story. She thought that she would be overwhelmed by sadness when she talked about the painful past, but the way he wrapped his arm around her made her feel better. He was trying to prove to her that no matter how bad the past might have been, he was here with her now, in the present. She sighed with emotions when she revisited her old haunts, but she was not as profoundly affected as she thought she would be. His undivided attention made her feel like talking more and more. Slowly, they entered the gardens and saw a phrase that filled the entire place, Di and Jiu, forever. Some were written neatly. Others were just words scribbled in different sizes and fonts. These carvings filled every surface that one could possibly find. It was easy to picture how desperate she must have been. This unsynchronized mess ruined the view of the gardens for any ordinary passerby, but not to Di Fui. He cherished every little carving that he found along the way. Gu Shijiu was noticeably a little embarrassed. I could not make your name stay, but these phrases did, so I kept carving and carving. I woke up the next day feeling defeated by the heavenly law and ended up losing all memory of you. When I first saw these phrases, I thought I was crazy. The master of heavenly law is such a bastard. Di Fui could not help but curse. Gu Shijiu wanted to remind him not to scold himself, but she was not allowed to spill the heavenly secret. Quietly, she swallowed her words and acted normally. After the talk, she found herself to be quite relieved. For the first time, she felt as if her sense of melancholy and yearning had fizzled out. Perhaps, there was a sense of closure to it all. Di Fui saw the change in her expression and was convinced that she had just defeated the trauma. He believed that the best way to recover from trauma was to face it. The more she tried to suppress her feelings, the more she was going to suffer. Therefore, a good, long talk was the key to releasing the deeply distressing experiences that she had been keeping in her heart for too long. Relieved, he sat her down on a chair while he went away to catch some fish. Chapter 27:27, Seek her salve where she gets her sore. 5. His kind gesture touched Gu Shijiu, so she decided to roll up her sleeves and join him. Let me do it. The fish that she requested was a very rare find, so it would be best if he did not ruin it with his inexperience. Therefore, both of them worked together and prepared the entire meal that mainly consisted of fish. Nonetheless, Gu Shijiu was only a helper, he was still the chef for the night. To Gu Zijia's surprise, the food that Di Fui had prepared was unexpectedly good. Gu Shijiu found herself filled with delicacies. After dinner, Di Fui sat down next to her on the chair, and the couple watched the night sky together. Gu Shijiu was surprised to notice that the star chart was vastly different from the one that she observed before. Perhaps, a major incident had changed everything that she knew about the stars. In fact, it no longer made any sense to Gu Shijiu. Di Fui noticed her bafflement and tried to explain the situation to her. Shijiu, the stars that we once saw were the ones that portrayed the fate of the starry crescent land. However, the chart that we are looking at now is the whole picture of every star that is present in the sky. Gu Shijiu finally understood why it did not make any sense to her. The chart that she was familiar with was probably solely restricted to the solar system. Perhaps, she was now looking at the fate of the entire galaxy. That also explained why she failed to find the star that represented her fate. She took a quick look at Di Fui and wondered what he was thinking of at that time. The place was created entirely by him, so it was only natural that the things that they were looking at now had changed according to his field of vision. If the entire star chart of the universe was displayed right here, could it be that he was already on the verge of recovering his identity as the master of heavenly law? If he did, would he still be the same man that she used to know? Understandably, Gu Shizhou was a little preoccupied with her thoughts and did not hear a thing that Di Fui tried to tell her about the stars and their features. Di Fui had to shake his hand in front of her eyes to catch her attention. Baby, time to come back. What were you thinking of this time? Gu Shizhou finally recovered from her preoccupation and caught Di Fui looking at her with a spurious smile. Without much thought, she said the first thing came into her head, I did not ask to learn this. You forced me to learn the star chart because you wanted me to take over your role as the Lord before you were immortalized. Why are you teaching me this right now? Are you trying to pass me the heavenly? She realized the mistake and quickly stopped talking. Di Fui seemed puzzled. She could not make up her mind about what she was trying to say, so she looked at him with a long pause, while trying to make up a legitimate excuse. Did you receive any bad messages from the heavenly law this time? Are you trying to pass me your role again? Still slightly puzzled, Di Fui rubbed her hair and said, You are overthinking. I do not have any role to pass on to you. Now that I think of it, I actually have one role. I am now the husband of the Lord. Shall I pass the role to you? He managed to tickle Gu Shizhou with the joke. You and your sweet talk. If you have nothing to offer to me, why are you telling me about the star chart? Silly, I am simply sharing the knowledge with you. In fact, this is the first time I am looking at it. At this point, he started to have some doubts. If this was his first time looking at the chart, why did it feel so familiar to him? He was even able to read the star signs without being taught. Between him and Fan Qianshi, he could not decide which one of them was the master of heavenly law. He had always doubted that he could be the master of heavenly law until Fan Qianshi showed up. After all, Fan Qianshi's kung fu was beyond Di Fui's level of understanding. Hence, it made sense for Fan Qianshi to be the master of heavenly law because of his powerful strength and ability to control many things at once. However, he changed his mind a little after he realized that he could read the star chart without any foundation or reason. But, if he was the master of heavenly law, what was Fan Qianshi's role? Chapter 27-28, I trust you. After some small talk, Di Fui was concerned that Gu Shizhou might be having a hard time digesting the food while sitting down, so he pulled her up and went for another walk with her. Gu Shizhou saw the words that filled another part of the gardens and was quite embarrassed. Fui is gone along with everything else, she wrote. Her desperate remarks spoiled the entire view of the gardens. She quietly rolled up her sleeves and performed a spell to wipe away the words along their walk. Deep down, she wanted to restore the place to its original beauty. Wiping away these words also made her feel better. It was like getting rid of her past anxieties and exasperation in one go. Stealthily, Gu Shizhou tried to remove the marks without Di Fui knowing. Di Fui had nothing against it. He only held her hand and walked the path together as if nothing was happening. As they continued walking, one of the stones they passed had a carving that said, Di and Jiu, forever. Di Fui immediately stopped her from removing it. Keep this one. It was at that point that Gu Shizhou realized that Di Fui knew what she had been up to all this time. She looked up, only to find Di Fui's hand on her forehead. This is a good sign and should never be wiped away. However, you may wipe the phrase about how I was gone like everything else because I will never be away from you ever again. Gu Shizhou was delighted by the last promise that he made to her. I take that as a promise. If you abandon me again, I will surely take revenge this time. Oh, baby, why did you make it sound so serious? How do you plan on getting revenge, exactly? Gu Shizhou had to pause to think about the master plan but realized that she would never hurt the man she dearly loved. She could not even find the courage to hurt his little finger. However, that did not mean that she could not hurt other people. After a while, she finally came up with a great plan. If you ever leave me again, I will become completely demonized, like a killing machine with no emotions. I will turn the entire world upside down. Di Fui was at a loss for words. He looked at her in astonishment, as he had never thought that she would make such a solemn statement with such serious consequences, which did not sound like her at all. Gu Shijiu was shocked by the remark as well. Was there something wrong with her? There were many other ways that she could get her revenge. If they really had to be apart from one another again, there were always ways to help her forget about him. She could even descend to the underworld for a bowl of mangpa soup to forget all of her earthly existence. Therefore, her statement did not make much sense to Di Fui. Gu Shijiu herself tried to shake the thought away. I was really worried that you might leave me alone again. I never meant any of those childish things that I just said to threaten you, she explained while gently patting his shoulder as a sign of comfort. Di Fui's heart sank a little. He found out from Di how that the boy already became an orphan not long after he was born. He did not have a good upbringing. Could what Gu Shijiu just said be a prediction of their future tragedy? He took a deep breath and made a promise to himself that such a tragic ending should never happen to them. Then, he pulled her into his arms and said, "Don't worry, you will never get the chance for your revenge. No matter what happens, I will always be by your side." Gu Shijiu planted a soft kiss on his chin. "I know. I trust you." The topic was unusually awkward and somewhat ridiculous, so Gu Shijiu decided to talk about something else. "What do you think about Fan Qianshi? I believe that he will not give up so easily. Someday, he will come back to us again. Of course. After spending so much effort on the plot, he surely will not let this go. If I am not mistaken, Long Fan must be one of his embodiments back in the day. Perhaps even the character of Zhu Duqing. He must have been the one behind the invasion from the people from the Blue Fox planet as well." "How do you know?" Di Fui showed her a book in his hand. The book has a record of some of the history of the great celestial master. He and his men first discovered the Starry Crescent land. He was also the one who made the rules and regulations for the Blue Fox family. He died of old age, eventually, and was buried. I sent someone to check the coffin, but it was empty. The members of the Blue Fox family are born with a unique characteristic that allows their skeletons to stay intact for more than 10,000 years. Chapter 27-29, I trust you, too, Gu Shijiu added. Do you mean to say that the plot began as early as 10,000 years ago? And that Fan Qianshi planted the Blue Fox family here all because of you? It seems like it. Di Fui nodded. There is something that bothers me, he continued while gently tapping on the table. Gu Shijiu looked at him in bewilderment as she waited for him to continue. From what I have observed, Fan Qianshi's spiritual power and kung fu are both stronger and more powerful than mine. It should be very easy for him to take my life or even tear my soul into pieces. Many options are far easier than this incredibly long plot, he explained. Also, he refused to fight me face to face and would rather run away as soon as he realized that his plan had failed. He did not even try to fight me. Don't you think that is a bit odd? It sounds odd, Gu Shijiu agreed. Perhaps he is intimidated by your identity. Maybe he will be punished somehow if he were to harm you directly. Di Fui shook his head. We fought before. No amount of catastrophic punishment is enough to make him repay for what he has done to me. He certainly is not worried about the punishment. What else could it be then? Perhaps I have a greater and more powerful identity, which happens to be intimidating to him. Maybe there is no way that he can kill me. Perhaps my death will restore my powerful identity once more, which will be his bigger threat. He must be afraid that I will take my revenge once I am back to where I belong, so he has to stay in the dark and play dirty so that I never find out who he really is. I believe that he is trying to find a way to destroy me for good, so I will not become who I really am. Gu Shijiu remained quiet. She could not agree more with Di Fui's theory, but she could not say anything. Gu Shijiu recalled her dream. Everything seemed blurry, but the Master of Heavenly Law and the Man in Black clearly made an impression on her. Could Fan Qianshi be the Man in Black? And, was it possible that the Master of Heavenly Law would once again become powerful once his life came to an end? Death would never truly occur to him. Once he became who he really was, Fan Qianshi would never be able to defeat him. Therefore, Fan Qianxue chose to conceal his true identity and would only disguise himself with other forms to help him blend in with Di Fui's surroundings. This was to keep him safe in the event that Di Fui remembered who he really was in the past. As for Di Fui's weakness, Fan Qianxue must be looking for something beyond the physical. Otherwise, he would have found it a long time ago. Gu Shizhou suddenly remembered about the video that Fan Qianxue showed her. She figured that some parts of the video must still be true. For example, the Master of Heavenly Law used to be a man who had no emotions and no regard for anyone by staying aloof from all worldly matters. Only without emotions could one be truly strong. He needed to be fair and square without any biases before he could secure his position as the Master of Heavenly Law. Since he could be so objective, his existence was too powerful and intimidating. There was nothing that could truly become his weakness. As the creator of the universe, Fan Qianxue had to create something to become Di Fui's weak spot, so he could regain his power. Could Gu Shizhou be the weak spot that Fan Qianxue had purposely created for Di Fui? Gu Shizhou shivered a little at the thought of the possibility. The Master of Heavenly Law was not allowed to fall in love with someone else, or he would have to surrender his power. If the video was true, then Fan Qianxue had already achieved his aim. However, something did not quite make sense. Di Fui had been in love with her since quite a long time ago. Why did Fan Qianxue even bother to take the role of Zhu Duqing and create more feuds? He only needed to wait patiently until Di Fui finally surrendered his power to him. There was no need to do so many unnecessary things like getting Little Fox pregnant with a demon. Chapter 2730, I Trust You, 3. In order to make Di Fui surrender his power, perhaps there was a lot more that needed to be done. It surely was not as simple as creating a trap for him to fall in love. Gu Shizhou could not help but look at Di Fui confusedly. Her heart was filled with a myriad of feelings. The man was the Master of Heavenly Law. No one would have known that the man would eventually fall for someone like her. Yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to compromise on so many of his principles. Why are you looking at me like that? Di Fui noticed her odd gaze. He gently tapped on her head and asked, Are you so obsessed with me? He looked at her pridefully, for he was proud of his qualities as her perfect partner. Gu Shizhou made a sibilant sound as a sign of disapproval. Don't you feel embarrassed? You are feeling way too good about yourself. Di Fui laughed out loud and replied, I truly am a good man. Why should I underestimate my own qualities? You said that you might have a more powerful identity. With power comes responsibility. What if you are not allowed to fall in love with anyone at all? Gu Shizhou asked casually. I do not care a thing about fame or status, Di Fui answered casually. If there really is a conflict between power and love, I will give up the power. No matter what happens, I will never let you go. It is hard to say. In the video that Fan Qianxue played for me, you were portrayed as a despicable man. You chose to kill me in order to secure your power. She uttered and then stopped talking, all of a sudden. She realized that she might have spilled a heavenly secret, so she waited for a while to see if there was any catastrophic punishment, but there was none. Di Fui seemed interested. What video did he play for you? Was it about us? It was about all three of us, but I can tell that the scenes were mostly made up. There were too many loopholes that did not make any sense. I do not believe in any of those theories. Di Fui paused for a moment to think. May I have a look at the video? The video was played by using a piece of secret equipment on board the spaceship. I only remember the content, so there is no way I can play it again for you. I can tell you more about it if you want. Di Fui shook his head in disapproval. The video could be important. You might have missed out on some points. He gazed at her in contemplation. If you do not mind, may I read your mind to look into your memory about the video? Ah. Do you know how to read one's mind? Yes. All right, go ahead then. Gu Shizhou agreed without hesitation. After a while, Di Fui finally let go of his hands from her forehead. His silence was a clear indication of how shocked he was after seeing what the video was about. He needed some time to process everything and make things clear. Meanwhile, Gu Shizhou was starting to get tired. She had been feeling quite exhausted for the whole past month. Therefore, she decided to close her eyes for a short nap. She would talk to Di Fui later when she was more rested. To her surprise, the short nap turned out to be a long, deep sleep. When she woke up, it was already the next day. She found herself in a bedroom at the Biwu Palace, instead of the lazy chair in the garden. Needless to say, Di Fui must be the one who had brought her back. Di Fui was lying close by her side. He was looking at her intensely the moment she opened her eyes. "What do you think about the video?" Gu Shizhou was not embarrassed to stare back at him. "The video is helpful to me." With a smile, Di Fui took the video as a possible answer to many of his questions. "Are you saying that the video is based on true events?" Gu Shizhou was puzzled. "After much thought, I realized that a few things could be true." Gu Shizhou was ready to listen with all her ears. "First of all, our identities should be true. I am the master of heavenly law, while he is one of the creators of the universe. Secondly, he refuses to accept that I am the master of heavenly law, so he tried to get his hands on this power. Thirdly, as the master of heavenly law bears no weakness or biases, he has to create a disturbance, which is why you were created in the first place. The rest is just nonsense. I am not such an evil man." His theory made so much sense. Gu Shizhou was relieved, but not entirely at ease. "If you agree that he is the creator of the universe, do you also agree that you and I were both created by him?" Di Fui expressed his disapproval. "Although I remember nothing about my origin, my instincts clearly indicate that it is untrue. You, too, are not necessarily created by him." This video reminds me of the ancient story about how Pangu created the world for mankind and how Nuwa Empress made human figurines out of clay. Also, there was Fuxi, who created the laws to govern us. All three of them were the ancient gods. They were the ones who created the 6 worlds that made life possible. All of them were equally important, only with different tasks in nature. If I am not mistaken, Fan Qianxue was only pretending to play the role of Pangu by creating order in a messed-up world. He was not meant to control the heavenly law or to alter any regulations that were reinforced by the heavenly law. The heavenly law is just like Fuxi, one of the creators of the universe. Gu Shizhou was astonished. "So, am I the legendary Nuwa Empress?" Chapter 27:31, She loved what he just said. Gu Shizhou started to doubt herself. It does not sound right. Nuwa Empress knew how to make human figurines out of clay. She was the very ancestor of all mankind. I know nothing of that sort. In fact, Fan Qianxue is the one who knows how to make humans. The clones that he made are just examples. Di Fui gently rubbed her temples and said, "Silly, that was only a metaphor. I was only describing the relationship between Fan Qianxue and I. I am not Fuxi, and he is not Pangu. As for Nuwa Empress, there is no sign of any connection between you and her. She only exists in folk tales." Gu Shizhou fell back onto the bed. "That is disappointing. I thought I could be more powerful and noble." Di Fui lay down by her side and pulled her into his arms. "Just be yourself. There is only one of you. No one can ever replace you. Why should you care about having a different identity?" She loved what he just said. Her broad smile clearly showed how happy she was at that remark. "Actually, I only want to be your perfect match. But, there is no denying that I wish I could be as mighty as Nuwa Empress." Delightfully, Di Fui answered, "I don't like Nuwa, I only like Gu Shizhou." His words melted her heart. Gu Shizhou buried her head in his chest. "Yes, I am your one and only, so are you to me. Regardless of your identity, the one thing I want for us is to be together forever." He could feel her warm breaths on his skin and her soft body in his arms. Aroused, his blood started boiling in excitement. They had not had sex ever since they were reunited. Each night, he had to suppress his sexual desires every time he held her in his arms. Their sweet exchange was also a cause of physical and mental suffering to him. He wanted to make love to her so badly. Nonetheless, she had just passed her first trimester, so it should be safe for them to have sex. He continued to gaze at her intensely. Playfully, his fingers slowly circled her waist tie, still deciding whether he should pull her robes open. "Shijio, is it time?" Gu Shijio looked up and caught the burning look in his eye. She could tell that he was aroused just from one look. She stammered a little. Her cheeks were already flushing crimson. Di Fui waited for a while, but she still had not answered his request. He thought that she was reluctant and was slightly disappointed to learn that. "It is all right. I can wait until the baby is finally here," he replied with a smile. With that in mind, he did not want to be on the bed anymore. He decided to go outside for a stroll and calm himself down in isolation. To his surprise, Gu Shijio suddenly wrapped her arms tightly around his waist. Di Fui suddenly became motionless. He could feel her heat even through a layer of clothes. She said with involuntary pauses, "Actually, there is no need to wait. We just have to. I have to be careful." Di Fui's eyes glistened with excitement. He turned around and pulled her body into his embrace. Needless to say, both of them started panting in excitement. He kissed her lips softly and whispered, "I will be careful." They both felt a strong longing for each other. Finally, they were able to be free and express their love for one another. They started to get undressed, with all of the clothes sent across the air and folded tidily on the rack next to the bed. Behind the thin curtains, the man and the woman had been stripped naked. Intertwined, the couple was drenched in ecstasy, for making love was an instrument of romantic expression for their passionate love. Gu Shijio fell asleep. This time, she was happy. She seemed relaxed and pleased. Di Fui sat against the wall. Troubled, he had a hard time sleeping, so he sat and watched her sleep for a tremendously long time. Their lovemaking was not easy. The entire time, he had to be soft and careful to avoid hurting the baby in her tummy. Hence, he was not fully satisfied. Chapter 27:32, A nightmare at least, he got to spend the night with her, and for that, he was happy. Apart from that, he was still a little puzzled. At some point during their sweet exchange, Gu Zijia's eyes flashed a tint of red light when she was at the climax of her sexual excitement. It was only for a second, so if Di Fui had not looked her in the eye at the moment it happened, he would not even have realized it. What puzzled him, even more, was the mysterious source of dark and evil aura that was hidden in the depths of her body. He could feel something while he was inside her body. At first, he thought it was only a mistake, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt uneasy. He examined her body over and over, but nothing was found. He put his fingers down by her wrist to feel her pulse. Everything was perfectly normal. He could not help but think if he was oversensitive. Still worried, he waited until she was sleeping soundly before he used his spiritual power to trace every inch of her veins to make sure that she was fine. Gu Shijio woke up from a dreadful nightmare. She had been strolling through a blanket of dense pink mist. From a distance, a child could be heard crying. She followed the voice and found a baby girl in the corner. The baby was only a few months old, looking very sweet and adorable. Her chubby hands and chubby thighs curled up in rolls of fat. The girl was still crying, making Gu Zijia's heart sink. She could not resist the instinctive urge to hold the baby. Before she managed to touch her skin, she was surprised to find out that there was a trace of dark energy surrounding the baby girl's body. Shocked, she stopped to observe the strange encounter. The dark energy around her body strangled the baby, so it was difficult for her to breathe. The unexplained occurrence baffled her. She decided to perform a spell to dismiss the dark force and free the baby, but while she was waiting for the spell to activate, the dark source of energy suddenly came alive and turned into the form of a snake. Frighteningly quickly, the snake went into the baby's body and disappeared before her eyes. Gu Shijio did not see that coming. She scooped the baby up, so she could have a good look at her. Slowly, the baby opened her eyes and said something with difficulty, "Mother, help me." Certainly, she was caught off guard. A bloodshot tint of red replaced her dark eyes. Even her lips turned entirely red, too. "Hey, Mother," she smilingly said, but in a very different tone from before. The baby's wicked smile terrified Xueyi. For a moment, she thought she was holding an evil being in her arms. Utterly shocked, she screamed out loud and abruptly woke up from the nightmare and realized that she was still in her bedroom with no sign of any baby girl. Her heart still thumped with fright, and her entire body was drenched in sweat. "What is it? Did you have a nightmare?" Xueyi gently rubbed her forehead. With a sigh, Xueyi nodded. "What was the dream about?" Xueyi paused for a second. In an instant, she had forgotten what the dream was all about. She could roughly recall seeing a beautiful child who referred to her as mother. There was only one child who would call her so. She immediately assumed the dream was about Xueyi. "I think the dream was about Xueyi." "What about him?" "I barely remember what happened. I only know it was a nightmare." She suddenly became nervous. "By the way, we have not heard from him in a while. Has something bad happened to Xueyi?" Chapter 2733, I am just a little bored. Quickly, Xueyi retrieved her directed audio spell to get in touch with Dihao. It did not take long before he picked up the call. "Mother, are you missing me?" Xueyi was slightly relieved. The voice sounded lively, so he should be fine. However, the background noise from the other end of the call startled her. She could hear the sound of wind whistling and people fighting. There was even a long, doleful cry uttered by some animal. Dihao was obviously in the middle of a fight. Had he been attacked? Where did Yanli go? Xueyi had so many questions for Dihao but was interrupted. "Mother, are you doing fine? Where is father?" If Dihao had the time for much chit-chat, he must be doing fine. Moreover, Yanli was there with him. Yanli made a promise that he would keep the boy safe. No being in the Starry Crescent land was strong enough to threaten Yanli. Therefore, under his care, Dihao would not be at risk at all. Even if there was a danger, all Dihao had to do was to stand and watch. "Your father is here. Where are you? Who are you fighting with?" There is nothing to worry about, Mother. I am just a little bored. Right now, I am messing around with a flood dragon." It was only a flood dragon. Yanli, and even Dihao, could easily defeat a flood dragon. No matter how powerful the dragon was, it was surely not enough to fight them. She enjoined her son to be obedient, and Dihao acknowledged her concerns with a few chuckles. While they were still chatting, Yanli's abrupt voice could be heard screaming from behind. "Dihao, are you trying to kill yourself? Get down from it now." Yanli's instructions alarmed her. She could tell that he was raising his voice from at least 100 meters away from Dihao. "Mother, let's continue next time. There is no need for you to worry about me. I am doing just fine." Dihao ended the call abruptly. That left Xueyi baffled. Yanli was slightly depressed, but he rarely lost his composure. He was definitely a refined gentleman. Therefore, Dihao must have done something terrible. Yanli was utterly annoyed. When Dihao spoke to his mother, he was sitting on top of a snowy white flood dragon. He hung himself around its horns and was being flung around like a mini windmill. The flood dragon was no ordinary one. It was about to become a nightmare for them. Normally, a flood dragon's spiritual power would be around level 10, thus making its existence somewhat spectacular in the land of mortals. No one dared to approach them. However, Yanli could still easily defeat them all, even if 10 flood dragons chose to attack him at once. Hence, when Dihao told Yanli to hunt down a flood dragon in exchange for his freedom, he did not hesitate to agree. Never had he expected that the flood dragon that Dihao found was the king of the herd. Furthermore, it was about to reach its next stage of evolution into a real dragon. There were strict conditions to decide whether a flood dragon could be transformed into a real dragon. Sometimes, the probability was less than 1 in a million. However, if a flood dragon was able to meet all the conditions, it definitely had eminent qualities that were unparalleled with the rest of its kind. The snowy white flood dragon in front of them was the best of its kind. It had been cultivating for more than 10,000 years now, which made it more ancient than any of the other beings in the starry crescent land. It barely showed itself in public and had been hiding and cultivating in isolation, near a mountain covered in snow. Its trails were so perfectly hidden that no one ever noticed its existence, not even Xueyi. Today was finally the day it could become a real dragon. It could achieve its lifelong dream. It was lying in a pool of clear water while trying to absorb the essence of the moon through a rift. Meanwhile, it had to spit out its internal pills so that dragon scales could slowly form around its body. The physical transformation was a difficult journey, but it was all worth it. When the final piece of its scale was transformed, it could finally become a mighty dragon. Unfortunately, 3 invaders interrupted it when it was 2/3 done. Not wanting to get distracted, it set off a tremendous pressure in the air in an attempt to sweep the 3 invaders away. To its surprise, only the lady was affected. Furthermore, the little boy took away the dragon pearl that was hanging loosely by its mouth. Chapter 27:34. Half of its heart. A dragon's pearl was the ultimate source of life for any kind of dragon. Given that a little kid had stolen it, the great white dragon quickly got into a towering rage. In a fit of violent anger, it took off in an attempt to recapture its stolen treasure. Dihao started running once he stole the pearl. What surprised Yun Yanli was that the silly boy was actually running away from Yun Yanli instead of towards him for help. Fortunately, his short legs were no obstacle to him. He was running incredibly fast, as though he had a pair of Hot Wheels on his feet. The great white dragon howled its displeasure while engaging Dihao in a close pursuit. In Yun Yanli's field of vision, the two were drifting farther and farther away. Yun Yanli had no words for the boy's mischief, but he decided to follow them. When he finally saw them again, the boy was hanging on the great white dragon's horns. The great white dragon stood high into the sky, about 100 meters tall. It was shaking its head as vigorously as it could, swinging Dihao's little body in the air like a flag. The boy and the dragon were in the middle of a massive fight, and there was a chance that Dihao might be swallowed alive by the great white dragon at any time. Yun Yanli began to get really worried about the naughty little boy. He called out to him before leaping into the air to get the boy down. He did not take long to reach the boy, but Dihao reacted quickly enough to kick his hand away from grabbing him. "I want to conquer it." Yun Yanli was at a loss for words. He could not believe what the boy just said. In order to conquer a creature, one must defeat it and convince the creature to surrender wholeheartedly to the person whom it would now refer to as its master. Dragons were known to be proud of their impeccable pedigree. These creatures would not surrender easily. In fact, they would probably choose to accept death rather than submit. The flood dragon was almost evolving, so it must think very highly of itself. Moreover, its pearl was taken away at a crucial time, possibly rendering its previous efforts fruitless. Hence, the likely outcome of the fight was that Dihao could possibly be torn into shreds. So why would the flood dragon even surrender itself to the boy? It was highly unlikely. Under the current circumstances, Yun Yanli was convinced that none of them was able to leave this place alive. The flood dragon was, apparently, able to understand their conversations. It howled a loud cry of amusement. "I will never be conquered," it thought to itself. It would never allow its mighty self to be conquered by a despicable human that inconvenienced it. Then, the flood dragon spiraled into the sky, gathering speed as though it was becoming a streak of lightning. It started summoning the winds and the rain. Droplets in the air slowly transformed into sharp weapons, which were all simultaneously aimed at little Dihao. Yun Yanli followed them and saw everything that was happening in the sky. He watched as the rain droplets turned into sharp crystals, billowing and snapping in the wind like a swirling vortex. It was an attack on a catastrophic scale where the crystals were coming straight at Dihao from every angle. Obviously, the flood dragon had just launched its deadliest move. Even Yun Yanli would struggle to defend himself from the sharp crystals. What more for Di Hao was only a boy. On days involving long journeys, the boy would even request to be carried instead of walking on his own. He was so fragile that even stepping on a rock would bother him for the whole day. Once hit, the boy would end up becoming a hedgehog with sharp crystals. Without hesitation, Yun Yanli sent himself across the air and covered the boy with his body. At the same time, he also released a protective wizardry barrier to shield them away from the crystals. These crystals of tremendous force landed on his wizardry barrier like a storm, though most were bounced off. However, there were still many crystals in the sky. Chapter 27:35, Half of its heart. 2. Crystals were abundant in the sky, dropping toward them like a rainstorm of deadly needles. In just a few seconds, more and more needles started to get caught on the surface of the wizardry barrier, slowly causing the barrier to break. And, in the end, some needles were able to penetrate through and cut right into Yun Yanli's flesh. Yun Yanli's body trembled slightly as he snorted in pain. Blood slowly traced down his back and dripped onto the dragon pearl in Di Hao's hand. His blood then continued to stain the great white dragon's scales. The great white dragon was ready to swing them away from its head. However, the sudden smell of Yun Yanli's blood diverted its attention. Master! Ming Dai could be heard calling out loud to Yun Yanli from afar when she saw him bleeding. Desperately, she came straight to him. Roar! The great white dragon uttered another long howl before sweeping her away in a blinding flash of blue light, thus sending her across the air like a shooting star. Shocked, Yun Yanli wanted to leave and find her but was stopped by Di Hao. Don't go. Yun Yanli hesitated a little. While he still had a hard time deciding whether to stay or go, the dragon's long howl instantly distracted him. There were some pauses in between like it was trying to talk. Yun Yanli was never able to understand the language of the animals. But this time, he could magically understand the flood dragon. What is your relationship with the Emperor Immortal, Yun Lang? He was my father, Yun Yanli honestly answered, though still dumbstruck. Yun Yanli's reply startled the great white dragon. After a pause, it took a turn in the air and headed to the ground. Come on down. I will fulfill a wish of yours. It stopped by the hill, where they could finally stand and talk. The sudden plot twist caught Yun Yanli in astonishment. On the contrary, Di Hao was not quite as surprised. He tugged on Yun Yanli's sleeves and said, Come on, let's get down from here. After a while, Yun Yanli found himself sitting by the rock, caught with a myriad of thoughts. His father had once saved the great white dragon's life. So, in order to repay its debt to the man, the great white dragon made a promise to Yun Lang that one day, it would grant a wish to him, or his children, and fulfill anything that was asked. The only way for the great white dragon to recognize him or his children was to stain the pearl with blood. However, as an emperor immortal, Yun Lang never truly cared about the promise of a flood dragon, so he never mentioned anything about the promise or the flood dragon to Yun Yanli. The flood dragon valued loyalty very much. It had not forgotten about the promise that it made almost thousands of years ago. Yun Yanli was so surprised that he could not speak. Ask for half of its heart. Quick, ask for half of its heart. Yun Yanli could not deal with the cruelty. Taking away half of the flood dragon's heart would kill it. Meanwhile, the flood dragon had obviously heard Di Hao's request but said nothing. It was patiently waiting for an answer from Yun Yanli. Could you give me half of your heart? Yun Yanli awkwardly asked. Is this your only request? Yes, Yun Yanli firmly said. The great white dragon first looked at little Di Hao in bafflement, and then to Yun Yanli. Ask the boy why he needs my heart. To save a life, Di Hao answered before Yun Yanli even translated the flood dragon's message for him. He obviously understood the flood dragon too. Puzzled, the great white dragon asked, It is nothing strange for this man, the son of my savior, to understand my language. His late father and I once made a blood agreement. When his blood is dripped on my pearl, we can communicate with one another. As for you, How did you manage to understand me? Because I am a genius, Di Hao answered frankly. Chapter 2736, Half of its Heart, 3. The Great White Dragon was dumbstruck and decided not to linger on its earlier question. Whose life do you intend to save? The heavenly secret cannot be shared. Di Hao refused to tell. Di Hao gazed at the creature intently and reassured, you should know that the heart is very important to me, and the world. I am sure that it will not be wasted. He continued to play around with the dragon pearl on his hand. You will not die even if half of your heart is taken. What you need is to use this pearl to recreate the other half slowly. In 10,000 years, your heart will, once again, become a whole. The great white dragon looked at him in disbelief. I cannot believe that you are so well informed about these facts. Who are you, exactly? Di Hao. He answered delightfully. I have never heard of such a name. You have now. It is time for you to do what you have promised. Remember, I need the left half of your heart. The great white dragon hesitated a little. It was still unwilling to submit half of its heart so abruptly. It was finally the day that it could finally become a real dragon. Once its heart was taken, it would need at least another 10,000 years to reach the same milestone again. However, the promise must be honored. Even if it was unwilling to, it had no choice. The great white dragon still kept its promise, though it was not entirely ready. It had to endure the pain and slashed its chest open to take out its heart. With its sharp claw, it separated its heart chamber into two halves and submitted the left half to Di Hao. All of its scales were trembling due to the pain. Di Hao accepted the heart and, at the same time, returned the pearl to the great white dragon. He also offered it a bottle of medicine. This medicine will help your heart to recover faster. In 5,000 years, your heart will become whole again. The great white dragon headed straight into the snowy mountains to meditate and rehabilitate. It was then that Yun Yanli saw how messy the whole place had turned out to be. He then looked at Di Hao with a sudden realization. I finally know why you insisted on following me around. Your company has not been entirely pleasant, but I know now that you are only doing this all because you really needed the other half of the flood dragon's heart. Yes, Di Hao answered him honestly. How did you know that the connection between the flood dragon and I? Di Hao looked away and softly said, the heavenly secret must not be told. Yun Yanli was not quite pleased. At first, he did not want to agree to Di Hao's overbearing request. He never wanted the child to be around, but one directed audio changed his mind. The child promised to share more about Zhu Duqing to prepare Yun Yanli for his revenge. Without any forethought, Yun Yanli agreed. He thought that taking a child with him should not be much of a problem, even though he could tell that Gu Shijiu was not entirely at ease to see her child go. Acting on impulse, he made a promise to Gu Shijiu that he would protect Di Hao at all costs until the child was returned to her once more. Never had he imagined the kind of trouble he would have to go through. The child was too naughty. Many a time, Yun Yanli wanted to send the boy back to his mother. However, the boy would cry whenever Yun Yanli threatened to send him away. It was unusual to see a beautiful baby crying with great distress. Every passerby would automatically judge Yun Yanli. As for Mingdai, it looked as though she was the one instructing him to be cruel to his son from a different wife. It was a frustrating experience, to say the least. Mingdai was never fond of the little intruder who disrupted her personal time with Yun Yanli, so she was never friendly to Di Hao. The way she looked at him was even violent at times. However, she knew that she was not allowed to hurt Di Hao, or else Yun Yanli would be in great trouble. She had to suppress her urge to stab the boy in the back, even though she hated him to a great extent. Chapter 2737, Whose life are you trying to save? She did not utter a word to Di Hao for the entire time that they traveled together. The little one was acting weird as well, he only cared about Yun Yanli and never gave Mingdai any attention. When Yun Yanli had to be away for some errands, he would ask Mingdai to take care of Di Hao for a while, but Di Hao was never keen on it. The way he looked at Mingdai was always unfriendly. Sometimes even with a feeling of revulsion. All in all, Di Hao and Ming Dai were deemed to be incompatible in many ways. Yun Yanli was quite troubled by the tension, but he was at least happy to know that the boy relied on him. The little one is Zijia's child, so he thought it would be good if they could be close. In fact, he was glad to be needed and to have her child around. Little did he know that the child had a hidden agenda. Still puzzled, Yun Yanli looked at Di Hao sternly. Why did you have to make such a big plot involving me? If you really needed the other half of the flood dragon's heart, you could have brought your father here. He would have done the same thing with ease. Why did the boy insist on playing the fool and following Yun Yanli around? Di Hao explained, the flood dragon has been cultivating for more than 10,000 years and has never hurt a single soul. From the way it cultivates, it will one day become a celestial being. It has to submit its heart of its own free will. We are not supposed to kill it or threaten it, or else the heart will lose its effect. Yun Yanli was surprised. What do you need half of its heart for? Its heart can be used to purify even the darkest form of evil energy. You said that you needed it to save a life. Whose life are you trying to save? Di Hao took a deep breath before answering, a very close relative of mine. There was no reason to lie to Yun Yanli, for he had helped to retrieve the heart. A close relative? Who is it? Yun Yanli was baffled. Di Hao only smiled at him. It was yet another heavenly secret. With a sneer, Yun Yanli said nothing more and was ready to leave. From the way Di Hao fought with the flood dragon, the boy's kung fu was already so advanced that he would be just fine going on his own. Therefore, Yun Yanli found himself feeling a little foolish to think that the naughty boy actually needed his care and protection. Now that the boy already had what he wanted, Yun Yanli would not be of any good to him anymore. However, Di Hao seemed to be still following him. Where are you going? Yun Yanli did not even turn around to answer him. With a sigh, Di Hao knew how much he had offended Yun Yanli. He decided to tell Yun Yanli from far behind, stay away from Ming Dai. She is not the one for you. You are going to endure plenty of suffering if you stick with her. With a hiss, he disdained the boy's warning, for he knew how incompatible they were. Ming Dai was his most loyal companion with a heart of complete dedication. Now that she was swept far away by the flood dragon, he felt obliged to find her. Di Hao watched as Yun Yanli disappeared from his sight. He shook his head in disapproval, for he realized how soft-hearted Yun Yanli was for the woman. He would never be able to kill her, even though she would eventually become the greatest obstacle in his life. Di Hao started thinking if he should help Yun Yanli as a favor for what the man had done for him. He felt the need to kill the woman. When Di Hao found Ming Dai, she was unconscious. She had been sent flying through the air with such great force that she managed to bring down 2 trees with her before finally stopped at a big rock. Her celestial physique managed to keep her alive even though she was fatally injured. Her breathing was very weak, like a candle flickering in the wind. Di Hao looked at her for a while. Slowly, he raised his hand that was already loaded with a 7-colored ray. He never liked killing a woman, especially one who was already fatally injured. It would hurt his dignity, but he needed to help Yun Yanli. Chapter 2738, I will heal your wound. The 7-colored ray transformed into its brightest form. Apparently, Di Hao was ready to strike at any time. Ming Dai, on the other hand, was already dying. Once hit by the ray, she would be immediately killed. Bang! A streak of lightning emerged abruptly and collided with the 7-colored ray in Di Hao's hand. The violent bombardment of 2 immense powers managed to startle the entire area, sending tremors across the grounds as a result of the powerful collision. Ming Dai rolled a few rounds on the ground as a result of the impact. She started bleeding from her nose and her mouth while her breathing became even more unstable. Understandably, Di Hao was pushed away by the impact as well, and the blood in his body started boiling. He was a little pale and needed a moment to catch his breath. The force that stopped him was a celestial lightning bolt. In the sky, black clouds gathered overhead. It was an unmistakable ominous sign of more lightning to come. He knew that the first streak of lightning that hit him was only meant to caution him. If he insisted on killing the woman, he would be struck for real. Nevertheless, he refused to heed the warning and carried on with his mission to kill. Di Hao, what are you trying to do? A voice could be heard calling out loud from afar. In an instant, Yun Yanli emerged from the sky and stood himself between them. Yun Yanli's predestined fate seemed like an inexorable doom to the man. Di Hao finally gave in and changed his mind. He looked up and said in a discreet manner, Yun Yanli, Ming Dai is never going to be the right one for you. You have to be careful around her. Do not let her become an obstacle in your life. Yun Yanli remained silent. Di Hao certainly did not seem like an ordinary child. He talked like a divine being who was overlooking a mortal that was beneath him. The boy's serious expression certainly startled Yun Yanli a little. However, he did not know how to respond at the time. Swiftly, Di Hao left them alone. Yun Yanli was still caught in bewilderment. The boy often caught him off guard with many unexplained occurrences. It was also pretty odd that Di Hao was the first to locate Ming Dai in this desolate corner. None of the things he said or did made any sense to Yun Yanli. Was he only saying all this because of his unpleasant encounters with Ming Dai? Or had he foreseen something in the future? While Yun Yanli was all caught up in his thoughts, Ming Dai finally recovered from her unconsciousness. Master! Master, I am glad that you are. You are safe. She became hopeful at the plain sight of Yun Yanli. Yun Yanli knew that Ming Dai was the most loyal companion that he could ever have. She was also the only one who truly cared for him. Therefore, he could not let her die. He helped her up. Sit up. I will heal your wound. Ming Dai was so weak that she could not even sit up straight, but her eyes still shone with joy. She tried to steady herself to absorb the steady flow of energy from her back. Yun Yanli was transferring part of his spiritual power to revive her veins and vessels that were slowly dying away. Slowly but surely, signs of life returned to her ailing body. Yun Yanli had been quite distant to her for a while. They never really talked, as he seemed annoyed about the fact that she left the Shura world for him. Although Ming Dai felt despaired, she refused to surrender. The more he pushed her away, the more motivated she became. She disregarded all of Yun Yanli's disapprovals and stayed by his side insistently. She was loyal and faithful and ever present to serve all of his needs. He finally showed kindness to her and even offered to drain his spiritual power to heal her wound. This could be a good start. Clearly, he was not entirely unmoved by her devotion. After an hour, the entire treatment was complete. Yun Yanli finally let go of his hands from her back. Without the support, Ming Dai's body started to sway, and suddenly, she spat out a mouthful of blood. She seemed to be falling back to the ground. Yun Yanli reached out for her and supported her with his arm. Still not feeling well. Meanwhile, she supported her head on his chest. Ming Dai's pale face clearly showed how uncomfortable she was. I feel terrible. Chapter 2739, Address me as your brother. Yun Yanli frowned and checked her pulse once again. He realized that there was no improvement in her injury, and she was still unable to move around by herself. She struggled to get up. I can walk. She spat another mouthful of blood after struggling for a moment. Yun Yanli remained silent but carried her in his arms. I'll get someone to check on you. He was not a medical expert, but common injuries were not something difficult for him. Nonetheless, he was helpless when it came to such severe injuries like hers. Ming Dai rested in his arms while he carried her. She could finally lean on him. She had been waiting for this moment for years. That embrace belonged to her. No one could take it away. She would kill anyone that came in her way right now. Suddenly, she seemed to recall something. Where is His Highness, Di Hao? She asked as she looked around. Did the dragon eat him? He left. Yun Yanli replied calmly. He did not want to talk about that kid right now. Ming Dai was delighted that the annoying kid had gone. She could finally have some alone time with her master. That kid is too, she was going to say annoying, but she quickly changed her mind, too mischievous. His parents did not even bother to educate him. Yun Yanli's gaze darkened. Ming Dai, stop judging. He is just a kid. As usual, Ming Dai did not argue with Yun Yanli. Noted. I just feel that he does not look like a kid. What's worse is that he has been getting you into trouble. I'm mad that he made a mess. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking. Anyway, she was pleased that he had left. She knew that Yun Yanli did not love her, but that did not matter. She loved him, and she believed that love takes time to grow. Therefore, she was confident that Yun Yanli would fall in love with her one day. Yun Yanli silently leaped into the air with her in his arms. However, they almost crashed into someone on the way up. Xueyi. Xueyi was wearing a green robe, which made him look like a hermit. Similarly, he frowned in surprise as he saw Yun Yanli. He replied with a charming smile, Your Highness Yun, how are you doing lately? It's good to see you again. Oh dear, what happened to your subordinate? Did she get struck by a lightning bolt? Yun Yanli automatically had a bad headache when he saw him. He took a step back and replied, This has nothing to do with you. He then turned around and was ready to leave. Nonetheless, Xueyi stopped him with his flute. She looks terrible. Are you sure that you can treat her injuries? Yun Yanli got his message and quickly asked, Do you know how to heal her? Xueyi chuckled. I'm an expert in this field. Yun Yanli heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Xueyi's reply. Great, can you treat her injuries? Xueyi was dissatisfied with his question. Is this how you beg for help? Yun Yanli tried to endure his wickedness despite the misery he was already facing. Could you please, insincere? Yun Yanli clenched his fists secretly and added, What is considered sincere? What do you want? Yun Yanli knew that Xueyi would not be easy with him, and he had to go through a series of tortures if he needed his help. Xueyi pondered as he played with the flute in his hand. Address me as your brother. Yun Yanli immediately shouted, Are you sick? He knew that Xueyi was fooling him. Yun Yanli walked away without entertaining the request. Xueyi immediately added, Her blood vessels and nerves are severely injured. She will be dead in 3 months if she is not treated. Chapter 2740. Thinking about a wedding ceremony. Yun Yanli was still angry, however, he slowly turned around and asked, Are you sure you can treat her injuries? Of course. A hint of sarcasm still occupied Xueyi's eyes as he added, That's why you have nothing to lose by addressing me as your brother. Master. I don't want him to treat my injuries. Ming Dai spoke with a weak tone as she pulled on Yun Yanli's sleeves. She tried so hard to get away from an annoying child but had to encounter another annoying person just shortly after. Yun Yanli looked at her for a moment before his gaze returned to Xueyi. Xueyi was staring at him with a smile on his face as if waiting to say something mean. I'm an impatient man. Before he said something worse than that, Yun Yanli interrupted him, Brother. Xueyi was speechless. In fact, he was just joking with Yun Yanli. To his surprise, the man actually complied. He glanced at Ming Dai and knew that Yun Yanli truly cared for his subordinate. Jokingly, he added as he looked at Yun Yanli, I finally know how much you care about her. It is to the extent that you can put your principles aside for a subordinate. Yun Yanli frowned. Stop the crap. Save her as you promised. Xueyi went to her and requested, Call me your husband. Yun Yanli's face went pale. Xueyi, are you a man? Breaking promises is not something a real man would do. Coldly, Xueyi laughed. I've never thought so highly of myself. In fact, breaking promises is very common among devils. Have you forgotten this? Yun Yanli's face turned dark as he turned away with Ming Dai in his arm. He must have been insane to listen to Xueyi in the first place. He was not a trustworthy person. In fact, he might not even be capable enough to heal Ming Dai. Perhaps, he was just making fun of him. only Di Fui could tame a man like him. Within seconds, Yun Yanli disappeared along with Ming Dai. It wasn't easy for him to take her away so quickly since he only had one arm left. After watching him disappear, Xueyi shifted his gaze to the lotus root on his palm that was made of white jade. That was the Shi jade, a well-known herb that can heal and rejuvenate. Most importantly, it could help to fix broken limbs and make them grow again. Frankly, Xueyi was annoyed by the fact that Yun Yanli had lost an arm. He had been thinking about the jade ever since he heard about it from Di Fui. Finally, he was able to obtain one. Read the next chapter on our VIP novel. Nonetheless, his efforts seemed to be fruitless after all. He sighed as his fingers rubbed against the jade. It seemed that Yun Yanli did not appreciate the effort that he had made. "I'm sorry, young man. I can't treat this type of injury. Young man, this lattice blood vessels and nerves are badly injured. Please look for other physicians. I can't help. I'm really sorry, I can't help. I don't think she will live for more than 4 hours. Young man, you should prepare for her funeral." Yun Yanli had visited a few medical stores with Ming Dai. Unfortunately, none of the physicians could help. In the end, Yun Yanli decided to take a break. He was idling as he glimpsed at Ming Dai, who was lying in his arm. This lady was the only one who cared about him. Did God really need to take her away from him? Ming Dai was getting weaker, so she placed her hand on Yun Yanli's arm and tried her best to open her eyes. "Master, am I going to die?" Yun Yanli took a deep breath before replying, "Perhaps, I have another solution. I will bring you to see Shijiu. She can help." Ming Dai frowned and shook her head at his remark. "It's too late," she struggled to breathe before continuing her next sentence. "I don't want you to beg her, she looked down on you." Chapter 2741, The Obstruction at the Wedding Ceremony. The phrase struck Yun Yanli's face like a cane. "Do you want to die?" Ming Dai closed her eyes slightly as she heard that familiar threat. "My apologies, master." Yun Yanli was anxious and frustrated at the same time. He remained quiet as he strode forward without a direction. He pursed his lips as he was worried that Ming Dai might just die silently as he continued walking. "Master, you've promised to marry me," Ming Dai whispered. "I can marry you." Yun Yanli finally spoke after a long silence. Ming Dai has done so much for him, so the least that he could do now was to fulfill her last little wish. Ming Dai's eyes were opened widely. She had been dreaming this for a long time now, and it was finally coming true. Trembling, she tried to reach Yun Yanli's collar and grabbed it. "Could you please, give me a wedding ceremony? Just a small one, will do." It was challenging to organize a wedding ceremony within 4 hours. However, Yun Yanli would figure it out. Money could solve many problems. In addition, he was also good at threatening people. 3 hours later, the drummer, the red sedan, and a wedding officiant were prepared. Ming Dai finally embarked on the red sedan, however, she was lying down as she could not even remain seated. A moment later, she was sent into a mansion. The mansion belonged to a rich man in the town. Coincidentally, the owner had the same surname, Yun. Yun Yanli saw a sign at the mansion with his surname carved on it. An hour ago, he threatened the owner of this family to lend him his mansion. Although he had given the man a good offer, he did not hesitate to threaten him as well. The owner of the mansion came from an ordinary family. How could he even say no to Yun Yanli? In the end, they agreed to lend the mansion to him and even helped him to put up the decorations. As everything was put together in such an ad hoc fashion, none of them had time to invite their friends or loved ones. Yun Yanli was slightly depressed as he carried Ming Dai down from the sedan and walked into the wedding hall while the drummer was playing music in the background. Although Ming Dai was extremely weak, she still tried her best to stay awake and looked at him as much as possible. Yun Yanli closed his eyes to hide his emotions as he noticed her face getting paler and paler. What if he proposed to marry his beloved when he was dying? Would his beloved try to fulfill his wish? It was unlikely. He was nothing in her eyes, she would not even frown even if he died in front of her. He smiled with grief and tried to stop thinking about all this nonsense now. However, before he stepped into the wedding hall with Ming Dai in his arm, a man was floating around in the wedding hall. He was wearing a glamorous robe with light embroidery and carried a green flute in his hand while his arms were crossed in front of his chest. Yun Yanli, you are fast. I can't believe that you're getting married again. Marrying someone is just like having a meal, I guess. Yun Yanli had a headache just seeing the man. Kun Xueyi, why are you here? He asked in an icy tone. Kun Xueyi smiled and added, I'm a straightforward person. I'm not going to beat around the bush this time. You have two options now, you can continue marrying this little butterfly, and then we watch her die together, or, you cancel the wedding ceremony now, and it'll save her life. However, you need to promise me that you will have a clean cut with her after I save her life. Your call. Chapter 2742, Kun Xueyi's demand. Before Yun Yanli said anything, Ming Dai interrupted him, Master. I refuse to get any help from him. I would rather die. All I have ever wanted is the wedding. She would rather die in Yun Yanli's arms than to be removed entirely from his life. The separation was even more painful than death itself. Kun Xueyi ignored her. His eyes were only locked on Yun Yanli. Yun Yanli gazed at him in return. What do you want? Why must you stand between us? Kun Xueyi gave him a smile of mischief. Yun Yanli, let me remind you that you and I are married by the grace of God. I must stop you before you cheat on me. Kun Xueyi, you are a man. Why are you messing around? I have no time for your silly jokes. Yun Yanli looked very annoyed. I know very well that I am a man. Kun Xueyi kept his composure and calmly replied, however, who said that two men cannot get married? The last remark angered Yun Yanli. I am not gay. Kun Xueyi rubbed his palms in delight. Oh, but I am. Kun Xueyi's tone irritated Yun Yanli. It was evident that he was furious now. Perhaps, he would even unleash hell on Kun Xueyi. Choosing not to piss the man off even further, Kun Xueyi changed his attention to Ming Dai, who was still lying helplessly in Yun Yanli's arms. You can take your time to think about it. Very soon, perhaps the problem will be solved, and you will not even need to think about it anymore. With his teeth gritted tightly, Yun Yanli answered without any delay, I am going for the second option. Now, save her life. You are taking advantage of my misfortune, Ming Dai complained in a trembling voice. With his eyes squinted in delight, Kun Xueyi answered scornfully, Little Ming Dai, you are right. Taking advantage of situations is one of my favorite things to do. Ming Dai answered furiously, You are shameless. Even if you can break us apart, my master will never marry you for real. Who says that he is going to marry me? I am going to marry him. Kun Xueyi shook his finger at her while correcting her. Ming Dai was dumbstruck that she could only utter a word, you. Out of anger, she finally conveyed what she had always wanted to say. You are only doing this for the sake of Gu Shijiu, aren't you? She has already found the one that she loves, and yet she is still reluctant to let other men go. She had to send her son to disrupt us. Now, it is your turn. Ming Dai, stop speaking. Yun Yanli was not pleased by her statement. At first, it was easy for Kun Xueyi to sympathize with her ailing condition. However, her words completely changed his mind about saving her life. For what you have said, I should not even bother saving you life at all. What a mean assumption. I do not want to be saved by you. Ming Dai was indeed stubborn. Kun Xueyi gazed at her for a while before laughing sarcastically, knowing me, I always like to do the complete opposite of one's will. The more you refuse it, the more I intend to see it happen. He waved his hand and launched a streak of light at her, and she passed out after spitting out another mouthful of blood. Yun Yanli was triggered by the sudden strike. How could you? Swiftly, Kun Xueyi placed his finger on his lips to signal him to remain silent. Hush. There is no making without breaking. I cannot help her if she stays awake. Quietly, Yun Yanli observed the whole treatment from aside, as he was worried that Kun Xueyi might play tricks on him. The Kun was too tricky. He did not mean most of the things he said. Even the name that he first used to introduce himself to Yun Yanli was not his real name. It was only much later that Yun Yanli finally knew that his name was not Kun Yunjan. He would not believe it if he did not hear his friends calling him by his real name. Nevertheless, this time, Kun Xueyi did fool around. He was committed to delivering what he promised. Yun Yanli watched everything from the side. He noticed that Kun Xueyi's complexion changed to become quite pale and tired. It looked as if he was the one with the injury. When Kun Xueyi's sleeves slipped off, his bare arm also caught Yun Yanli's attention. Part of his skin seemed burnt with apparent wrinkles. Chapter 2743, Things That Should Have Happened. Surprised, Yun Yanli took a step forward to take a better look, but just as he advanced, his burn had been covered by a piece of his clothes. Baffled, Yun Yanli continued to watch Kun Xueyi perform the operation quietly. He decided to force himself to believe that the Kun's nasty injury had nothing to do with him. The only thing he should care about now was Kun Xueyi's ability to restore Mingdai's health. In another city, Di Hao was taking a break from his long journey. His exhaustion had prevented him from venturing any further. At first, the owner of the hostel was reluctant to accept the adorable child as a guest in his accommodation. Luckily, the little boy did not let his size limit him. He had certainly brought enough money with him. An ingot of shiny silver managed to draw the owner's attention away from questioning Di Hao's origin and family background. He was then assigned to the best guest room. Di Hao had an obsession with cleanliness, but this time around, he was too tired to care. He took a quick shower and climbed onto the bed and lay comfortably on the sheets. The shower must have gotten him a little refreshed as he did not fall asleep immediately. Intently, he observed his hand, like there was something precious on his palm. After a moment, he heaved a sigh of relief. It appeared that the future had been changed a little. However, he was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness, worried that his body might disappear any time now. Perhaps when the entire course of fate was changed, he would become non-existent and go back to where he truly belonged. He tried to recall his childhood again, but there was nothing else that he significantly remembered. At this point, there was only one possibility: his parents' destiny might have been changed, but there was no way he could tell if it was a good or bad change. Even though he came from the future, he had no way to predict what was going to happen. From what he could recall, he was already an orphan right after he was born. He had never met his parents and had merely stumbled through his childhood. When his spiritual power was high enough, he taught himself everything and could create magic from thin air. The boy managed to create a mirror that had the ability to allow one to look into their past, allowing him to look back upon the years when his parents were still alive. He dug into the past and found out everything that happened to his parents. From his vision, his mother and father never mended their fences in the Shura world, as Yunqing Luo was there to put every obstacle in their way. Their misunderstanding snowballed. Although both of them managed to disarm the array formation that affected the entire Shura world, they never managed to make peace with one another. Gu Shijiu eventually left the Shura world with grievance and returned to the Starry Crescent land. By that time, Lan Weihu completely fell into Fan Qianqi's plot. The primary and secondary venom finally took their forms. Lan Weihu died in agony while Yan Qin took his own life in the name of love. Obviously, Gu Shijiu took a really bad knock when some of her closest friends died. Grief and resentment started to consume her, which led the primary and secondary venom to get attached to her body. She managed to use her power as a great deity to purify the venom, but not without difficulty. However, the evil aura that the venom left behind was already disrupting her pregnancy. Eventually, the baby in her womb was turned into an evil being. The primary and secondary venom was the most profound form of a devil, and its venom had affected Gu Shijiu. She became a person of unpredictable moods with no self-control whatsoever. Day by day, the devil took over her from within. When Di Fui returned to the Starry Crescent land, the venom had already controlled Gu Shizhou to an unreversible extent. Many innocent lives were lost due to her violence. The Starry Crescent land had fallen into an abyss of miseries. Di Fui noticed her problem instantly, and after a series of violent battles, Di Fui finally defeated Gu Shizhou. He wanted to purify the evil aura that had taken control over her, only to realize that the source of all evil was actually coming from the baby in her womb. Chapter 2744, The Master of the Heavenly Law. Di Fui tried many ways to help her, but none could completely purify the devil from within. To his dismay, the evil spirit became agitated by his actions and drove Gu Shizhou even further into darkness. She was prone to anger and would kill anyone ruthlessly. Unfortunately, her cruelty had completely clouded her sense of judgment. In fact, the only thing she cared about was the child in her belly. Slowly, she started experiencing hallucinations and felt as though the entire world was going against her. Everyone was an enemy. One fine day, she even killed Gu Kanmo by accident. The severity of the problem had prompted Di Fui to talk to her about abortion. He told her to give up on the baby as they could always have more babies in the future. If she insisted on keeping the evil creature, the world would be doomed by a great calamity. Di Fui thought that removing the evil creature would set Gu Shizhou back to her normal self. Never had he thought that the evil spirit was already deeply rooted in her soul. At that point, there was no way that he could set her free from the evil attachment. Helplessly, he watched as she turned more and more evil every day. Her evil self was completely illogical and unpredictable. She killed for fun and wreaked havoc at every chance, causing the people of the Starry Crescent land to live in fear. The worst thing was that the evil spirit was contagious. Once Gu Shizhou injured her victim, he or she would be driven by the same devil to become a ruthless killing machine. It was at this point that Di Fui finally recovered his power and memory as the master of the heavenly law. With this responsibility, he had to fulfill his duty without fear or favor. There were only two options for him. He could choose to kill Gu Shizhou to completely destroy the devil and purify the world with good energy, or he could step down as the master of heavenly law, which would lead to his death as punishment by the heavenly law. In the latter scenario, Gu Shizhou would still plague the world until the next master of heavenly law emerged and served her justice. Knowing Di Fui, he created a third option. He mastered the highest form of a forbidden spell, one that could remove the evil spirit that was firmly established in Gu Zijia's soul. All of Gu Zijia's power would be removed in the process, thus reverting her to her normal self. When Di Fui finally caught Gu Shizhou, he had no choice but to severely injure her so that he could use the forbidden spell to get rid of the evil spirit in her body. The forbidden spell was a great torment as the entire process was carried out in burning flames, which was unbearable even for someone as tough as Gu Shizhou. She screamed in agony for 3 days and 3 nights straight, until the whole rehabilitation was complete. Every trace of the evil spirit was finally removed. She turned out to be only an ordinary celestial being, which granted her immortality. On the negative side, she would not be able to practice or carry out any spell ever again. That was truly heart-wrenching for her to accept. In order to make up for her loss, Di Fui arranged a great banquet to celebrate their marriage. It appeared that the forbidden spell that Di Fui had created was an effective method to purify her, but it was associated with a high level of self-harm. In addition to his violation of the heavenly law, his power became greatly affected. The relative movement of the celestial bodies was greatly tied to the spiritual power of the master of heavenly law. Once his power was weakened, all the stars fell into a chaotic mess, thus messing the order of all 6 worlds. Things became worse when he became infected by the evil spirit from Gu Zijia's body. Part of the evil spirit remained in his body, but fortunately, it did not affect his behavior, only his recovery. To restore his spiritual power, he would take 100 years, instead of 10. Chapter 2745, The Master of the Heavenly Law. 2. In the end, he had no choice but to resort to isolation. He sealed himself off in a bleak and lifeless land to focus solely on his cultivation. At that point, his relationship with Gu Shizhou was already at its worst. Gu Shizhou would not talk to him about anything at all. When he told her that he was about to isolate himself, she remained nonchalant. "What does it have to do with me?" she icily asked. Her reply had completely thrown Di Fui off guard. He said nothing more and went straight into isolation. What he did not know was that Gu Shijiu was already pregnant with their second baby, little Di Hao. Despite her hatred for Di Fui, she cherished the baby very much. She could always feel at ease whenever she thought of the baby. However, her days in the residence of the Master of the Heavenly Law were not without difficulties. She was solely responsible for the Master of the Heavenly Law's punishment, for she had changed him from an emotionless man into a man in love. In addition to her violent past and the fact that Di Fui was injured because of her meant that none of the servants in her new residence treated her with respect. They would not even talk to her at all. As for the celestial beings from the 6 worlds, they all looked down on her, but never really mistreated her. At least, they had to show some respect to the Master of the Heavenly Law. Most of the time, they would stay away to avoid seeing her in person. Without any kung fu, her spiritual power was even worse than a young servant in the 9th heaven. Anyone could simply hold her down with a single strike. She was as good as a decorative container that was only for display purposes. Many people talked behind her back, saying that her incompetence made her no longer a match for the Master of the Heavenly Law. She knew about the nasty things that people said about her. However, she was not bothered. The only thing that truly hurt her was the loss of her power. Being remarkably persevering, she tried many ways to practice her kung fu, but her attempts were all defeated by the internal injuries of her nervous system. Every time she tried to practice, every inch of her veins ached with wrenching pain. In the end, she chose to give up all for the sake of her baby. Di Hao was a celestial baby, which made him unique. He had been in her womb for 3 years. She was almost convinced that the baby that she was carrying was highly abnormal and could even turn out to be a beast. Fortunately, some fetal movement in her belly reminded her that the baby was well and alive. For the past 3 years, Di Fui had never shown up at all. Hence, Gu Shijiu felt forgotten. Although she never complained about it, deep down, she still cared. Apparently, Di Hao chose to come into the world at a bad time. Since Gu Shijiu was alone most of the time, she often got bored. Hence, she would go out and travel every once in a while. When the contractions happened, she was caught in the wilderness. Extremely strong waves of pain immediately consumed her. She was all alone, and the pain she was experiencing made it impossible for her to get home. Therefore, she found a quiet place and thought about delivering the baby herself. Di Hao's strength as a celestial baby was not to be underestimated. It certainly made it very difficult for Gu Shijiu. The entire labor lasted for 10 days, in a place that was cold and miserably isolated. Even when she was struggling with her labor, Di Fui never showed up at all. When she could no longer handle the pain alone, she finally cried his name out loud, hoping that Di Fui would hear her calling. Di Fui once told her that if she called his name out loud while wearing the love bracelet, he would be able to hear it. No matter where he was, he would surely make his way to her in not more than 2 hours. It had been more than 12 hours since her desperate call, but Di Fui was still nowhere to be seen. Understandably, she became unconscious the moment the baby was delivered. When she regained consciousness, she was still in the forest. Strong winds raved through the trees and numbed her body because of the intense cold. Understandably, Di Hao's birth was not properly handled, so the naked baby had been exposed to the cold for the past few hours. His signs of life were like a candle in the wind. Chapter 2746, The Master of the Heavenly Law, 3. Gu Shijiu struggled to carry the baby in her arms and was alarmed by his lack of vitals. Frantically, she tried to save the baby's life, but there was nothing that she could use to restore the health of an infant. She tried many ways, but the baby was still unresponsive. He was not even breathing at the time. She watched helplessly as the baby died in her arms. Alone, she sat in the snow with the dead baby in her arms for hours. The snow had covered her entire body in white by then. Soon, she passed out in the snow again due to the intense cold. When she woke up, Fan Qianshi was the first person she saw. In the predestined fate, Fan Qianshi's identity remained concealed. He was never exposed from the beginning. He stayed anonymous, even when the invasion of Blue Fox Planet happened in the Starry Crescent Land. There was no conflict between him and Di Fui, nor had they ever met. No one knew he was actually the man who plotted it all, not even Di Fui or Gu Shijiu was aware of him. Gu Shijiu was distraught with anxiety the moment she woke up and could not find the baby. Fan Qianshi told her that the baby was already dead and cremated. The news had brought her nothing but misery. She became hollow from within, and soon, she became very ill. There was no reason for her to live on anymore, so she began to be suicidal. Nonetheless, Fan Qianshi refused to let her die. He was, without a doubt, capable of stopping her from taking her own life. As a start, she was placed under intensive surveillance 24 hours a day. "You cannot stop me. You may be able to stop me now, but you cannot stop me forever," she firmly argued with the man. As long as she was determined to kill herself, she would eventually do it. After a long pause, Fan Qianshi told her that death should not be the only thing that she sought for. Without the baby, she still had her husband. As expected, Gu Shijiu sneered at him. After all these years of disappointment, she had lost all hope in Di Fui, the almighty master of the heavenly law. "If I could restore all of your kung fu and power, would you stop trying to kill yourself?" Fan Qianshi offered, after putting in much thought into the offer. The idea finally quenched her suicidal thoughts. Hope returned to her. Fan Qianshi treated her very well. He managed to cure her wounds by using a set of secret techniques and restored all of her power like before. He even taught her new kung fu moves so that she could become even more powerful than before. They were together every day and night, so Fan Qianshi eventually fell for Gu Shijiu, but the feelings were not mutual. One day, Gu Shijiu found a magic mirror in Fan Qianshi's residence that would reflect the whereabouts of the viewer's loved one. Apparently, her hatred had not clouded her love for Di Fui. She still cared for him. Their loss of touch somehow worried her. Although the master of the heavenly law would not be easily harmed, she was still worried that something bad might have happened to him. Determined, she turned the mirror on and saw Di Fui on the screen. Di Fui was not in any danger, nor was he in isolation. He had yet to return to his residence. Instead, he was touring the Celestial Kingdom to make a comprehensive survey about the people's lives in each area. However, he was not alone. His companion was the goddess of war from the Celestial Kingdom. The way she looked at Di Fui was obviously full of respect, and the admiration was mutual. They looked like a happy couple as they walked through the splendor of the mountain scenery. It would seem that Di Fui was not interested in visiting his wife once he was done restoring his spiritual power. Instead, he chose to travel somewhere else. Chapter 2747, The Master of the Heavenly Law. 4. Di Fui had not contacted anyone from the Starry Crescent Land to inform them about his plans. It would appear that he could really go on living as though she never existed. The goddess of war started a conversation with him, involving details about his wife. However, Di Fui did not seem to care. He shook his head and answered with a smile, "There is nothing special about her. I have lived for millions of years. Love affairs mean almost nothing to me. She was only a woman I met when I was undergoing a catastrophe in the lower bound. We were madly in love back then, but now that I have returned to the course of the heavenly law, nothing about us matters anymore. She once carried our child, but the child turned evil in the end, so I had to destroy it. She was injured in the process, so I decided to take her back and give her a place to stay. My residence had space for her, after all. Aren't you going to visit her? There is no point. My place is certain to remain safe and unthreatened. Without any kung fu, she will not be going anywhere. As long as she stays in my residence, she will be safe. I am reluctant to see her now. She is nothing but a decoration." Gu Shijiu spat a mouthful of blood onto the mirror and shut it down. Even though she could no longer see Di Fui, she stood gazing at the magic mirror for a very long while. She could not stop thinking about how much of a joke she was to him. After all these years of perseverance, she became nothing but a piece of decoration to the man she loved. Finally, Gu Shijiu agreed to marry Fan Qianxue. But in return, he must teach her the best kind of kung fu that he knew. She fully intended to become stronger than ever. Fan Qianxue swiftly agreed. He did not only teach her kung fu, but he had also even transferred some of his spiritual power to her so that she could experience a huge improvement in a short time. In order for Gu Shijiu to remarry, she had to break the love bracelet that connected her with Di Fui. Shattering the bracelet would also mean that their future together would come to an end. Before, she had no strength to shatter the bracelet into pieces. Nonetheless, as long as she kept on practicing, she would be able to break the bracelet someday. When she finally did it, the evanescent love bracelet shone a few bright streaks of seven-colored light before disappearing entirely. Subsequently, she was no longer Di Fui's wife. Fan Qianxue started preparing for his wedding ceremony. It was certainly going to be a grand banquet, so the news spread throughout the world. Many of his friends and acquaintances attended the wedding, including Di Fui, the man who had not shown up in a long while. As soon as he arrived, he became so angry that he destroyed the entire ceremony. Even Fan Qianxi's residence collapsed into ruins. The first heaven almost fell apart on that day. Di Fui was so powerful that he managed to create an earthquake that shattered the entire building. Obviously, Fan Qianxue became furious at what Di Fui had done. After an exchange of words, the two celestial beings decided to settle things then and there. The fight was absolutely world-shaking, destroying many things. In the very end, Fan Qianxue was defeated, and Di Fui burned him to death by using the fire of Red Lotus. As for Di Fui, he was severely injured, too. Gu Shijiu was a spectator during the fight and watched as Fan Qianxue died before her eyes. She was definitely enraged and became overwhelmed with resentment and hatred. Without much thought, she started attacking Di Fui. She summoned a sword and charged it with all of her power. It was the deadliest strike that she could launch at Di Fui. All this was to seek revenge for Fan Qianxue and herself. However, she had never really thought that the sword would really hit Di Fui. When she rushed aggressively towards him in the attack, he saw her coming, but never defended himself at all. The sword cut through his heart and nailed him to a wall. Naturally, no amount of weapons was able to hurt the master of the heavenly law. However, what Gu Shijiu used was a special technique that she had learned from Fan Qianxue, which was specifically tailored to killing the master of the heavenly law. As punishment for Di Fui's violation of the heavenly law, he was no longer clothed in an armor of proof. Gu Shijiu was his weakness, and also the only person who could ever truly kill him. Therefore, Gu Shijiu watched as Di Fui became immortalized under her sword and turned into faint streaks of light that wandered away. He wanted to explain himself, but never had the chance. Chapter 2748, The Master of the Heavenly Law, 5. Before he disappeared completely, he managed to utter two last words, "Our child." Gu Shijiu became dumbstruck in the aftermath of his death. She slowly sank to the ground, trying to absorb and accept what had happened. Fan Qianxue and Di Fui both had many friends. Both parties found it unacceptable that the same woman had caused the death of two mighty beings, especially since no one knew the truth behind the feud. They only believed what they saw. The two powerful men were dead, all because of the same woman. They gathered around her and started judging her like an evil enchantress who would only bring death to whoever she came into contact with. Words of abuse and contempt filled the air. Some were cursing at her, others were crying at the loss of the men that they worshipped. Despite their harsh words, she remained unresponsive the entire time. In actuality, she could not even hear a word they said. Still trembling, she looked at her hands in remorse and started murmuring, as if talking to herself. "Why? Why didn't you fight back?" She kept repeating her hoarse whisper. Every word was filled with deep regret and guilt. Her hands were still stained with Di Fui's blood. The strange thing was that instead of dripping away, his blood began to seep through her skin. All of a sudden, Gu Shijiu seemed to have emerged from her preoccupation. Her body started trembling violently. She took the sword in her hand and stood up abruptly as her power was so strong that her aura became instantly intimidating, pushing everyone away from her. Finally, they realized that the woman who they once thought was useless had become so powerful in an instant. She retained an unpleasantly overbearing aura that would make the people around her fall to their knees and surrender themselves to her. Panicked, they wanted to run, but their feet were too weak to move. Everyone in the crowd thought that it was the end. The woman would surely make them suffer. However, to their utter surprise, Gu Shijiu did not even bother to look at them. Looking pale and drawn, she stood in solitude and started performing a series of spells. Some informed ones could tell that she was performing a type of soul-calling spell, one that could summon dispersed souls, no matter how fragmented the deceased might be. After a long attempt, not even a fragment of the person's soul who she was trying to rescue was collected. In despair, she finally stopped trying. She suddenly threw back her head and laughed out loud hysterically. To everyone's surprise, she used the same sword and pushed the sharp edge right across her own body. The gaping wound gushed out a crimson flood. Di Fui, I am the one who killed you. Now, I shall avenge you. It was her last message. Next, she used a spell that caused her body to explode into bits. That was the last image that Di Hao saw from the magic mirror. A mist of blood floating through the air. Aside from Gu Zijia's perspective, Di Hao was also able to see Di Fui's side of the story. From the screen, Di Hao could see that Di Fui had indeed gone into isolation, and the fact that he was in love greatly obstructed his recovery. He could not stop worrying about his wife, who was all alone. His lack of concentration had almost cost him his life. The time when Gu Shijiu was struggling in labor was also the time when Di Fui was struggling in his practice. As a result of his erratic practice, he turned into a jade statue without any sign of life. All 5 senses of his were lost, so he never heard any of Gu Zijia's calls. However, the lifeless transformation was actually a blessing in disguise for the man. When he finally regained his consciousness, half of his spiritual power was already recovered. Relieved, he planned to rest up for a bit before leaving the place, but all of a sudden, the love bracelet on his wrist had shattered. Chapter 2749, The Master of the Heavenly Law, 6, Panicked, he could no longer stay still. He tried to see what happened, but his lack of focus had messed up his calculations. So, he left the place and returned to his residence immediately. From the servants, he found out that Gu Shijiu was pregnant. He also learned that she had been missing for many days. They were still trying to locate her. He felt as if a thunderclap had gone off just above his head. Anxiously, he started making calculations about Gu Zijia's whereabouts. The more he analyzed, the paler his face became. Finally, he was able to track the exact place where Gu Shijiu delivered the baby. In order to find out the baby's location, he began to perform a series of secret tracking spells. The baby was finally uncovered in a forbidden land that was very much out of sight. He made his way through the forbidden land and found Di Hao, who was placed in an ice coffin. Di Hao's tiny body was frozen into a little ice ball. He was not breathing and did not show any sign of life, but Di Fui noticed that the boy's soul had never truly left his body. Technically speaking, the boy was still alive. Apparently, he had inherited some of Di Fui's unique characteristics. In order to survive in times of great danger, Di Fui would turn into a jade statue. As for the boy, he would play dead and appear as a corpse. Upon examining the ice coffin more closely, Di Fui realized that there were traces of Fan Qianshi all over the place. Hence, Di Fui immediately knew that it was Fan Qianshi who froze his child in ice. Surprised, Di Fui used his power to melt away the ice so that he could transfer some of his spiritual power to the boy and revive him. The boy's exposure to the cold had significantly weakened his health. He could not even keep his eyes open. Without Di Fui's help, the boy would certainly never be able to wake up. While Di Fui was trying to save Di Hao, he also took the time to collect any clues around the ice coffin to understand the scenario better. He tried to picture the entire scene and imagined Fan Qianshi taking the baby in and sealing him away in the ice coffin. Before Fan Qianxue left, he had placed his hand on the coffin and said, "You have already obtained the rarest kind of celestial body even at such a tender age. What a miracle! I will freeze your body here for a while. Your blood and flesh can be of good use to me in alchemy. I can make a special pill out of your flesh, one that can make your mother fall irrevocably in love with me." Having retrieved Di Hao from the ice coffin, Di Fui then carried the baby away from the Forbidden Land. As soon as he escaped, the news about Fan Qianxue and Gu Zijia's wedding was already publicly announced. Nonetheless, he would not allow the wedding to happen, even if it meant spelling his death. However, the baby was too weak to be involved in the fight, so Di Fui set up a wizardry barrier around him before putting him in a cave. The cave was very well hidden, so there were hardly any signs of human activity around. In addition, there was a source of spiritual power in the cave, so the baby could absorb the very essence of heaven and earth to nurture his spiritual body. Before he left, he sealed off the cave with another wizardry barrier, so that no outsiders could enter and disrupt the baby. When everything was secure and done, he headed straight to Fan Qianxi's residence. At this point, Di Hao had already seen everything that he needed to know. He knew how his parents would eventually die. Every image was vividly played. Every conversation was clearly heard. However, he could not figure out what they were all thinking about when the incident unfolded. He never knew the true cause of his mother's great change in the end. However, he was sure that what she saw in the mirror was not true. Fan Qianxue must have twisted the facts and made her see something else. Di Hao became an orphan ever since he was only a baby, so he never got to know his parents in person. However, he believed that his mother would not kill Di Fui. Some sort of spell must have been controlling her until Di Fui's blood disarmed the limits to her power, possibly enabling her to take back control of herself. However, when she finally regained her consciousness, the mistake had already been made. There was no way she could amend it. Chapter 2750, The Master of the Heavenly Law, 7, Di Hao became the next Master of the Heavenly Law. He finally learned about the responsibilities and realized how rebellious his father had been to keep his family safe. Nonetheless, he did not succeed. It seemed that their love was destined to end with heartbreak. Having grown and gained enormous power, he used a secret technique to find out about Fan Qianxi's history, which was the first time he really learned about the man's identity and his intention behind the plot. Initially, Di Hao believed that Fan Qianxue wanted to be with Gu Shizhou, and that was the start of how all three of their lives came to an end. However, after knowing more about Fan Qianxue, it appeared that the only thing that he truly wanted was to become the master of the heavenly law. However, his lack of capability obstructed him from competing with Di Fui. Thus, he had to play dirty. Gu Shizhou was only his tool, as she was the only one who could kill Di Fui. Many plans were set in place in this elaborate plot, and things slowly evolved to the point that he desired. Everything worked out well for him. He did not even need to expose himself or his true intention. The only thing that did not happen according to his plan was his death. He never thought that he would die in the hands of Di Fui first. In the very end, all was lost for Fan Qianxue. He achieved nothing from all his troubles. The yellow candlelight was diffused in the dark. There he sat, reminiscing about what happened to his parents. He could not help but heave a deep sigh of relief, for the venom in Lan Wei's body was the key that led to his parents' tragic death. Without the venom, his sister, Di Xueyi, would not have died before she was born. His mother would not have suffered under the control of the evil spirit placed in her by Fan Qianxue. Di Hao managed to change many things after traveling through time by accident. For example, Fan Qianxi's identity was already exposed at such an early stage. Furthermore, the primary and secondary venom had not taken shape to cause any harm. Even his father had regained his memory as Di Fui in advance and was no longer the innocent little Nianma of the past. Finally, his parents had completely talked themselves out of their misunderstandings. Although his mother once had contact with Lan Weihu and was affected by the evil aura, it was nothing serious. The evil aura was not enough to cause any harm to her body. The baby was still Di Xueyi, not some evil being. With half of the flood dragon's heart in his possession, everything was going to turn out well. Di Hao looked at his little hand in faint lights and started giggling. He was glad that his limited body size had not hindered his capability. He thought to himself that what he had accomplished was rather impressive. With that in mind, he rolled around comfortably in the sheets. However, another question struck him. If the course of history were to be changed completely, his parents would still be alive, so his father would remain as the master of the heavenly law. Perhaps, he would not need to take on the responsibility and could be free to pursue whatever he wanted. It was the kind of future that he looked forward to. Just keep going, he thought to himself. When Di Hao was busy celebrating his milestone, Di Fui finally found the hidden devil in Gu Zijia's body. The devil was very well hidden by masking its evil power with Gu Zijia's spiritual aura. Also, its evil power had significantly been toned down to become as natural as her spiritual aura, so no one would realize its existence. The only noticeable difference was Gu Zijia's change of mood, but the symptom could easily be misread as part of pregnancy. Fortunately, the devil was still weak. In order for it to grow, it needed to absorb more energy from a strong man. Its need for a male had triggered Gu Zijia's sexual cravings. The two lovebirds had always been passionate about one another. Only this time, Gu Shijiu was the desperate one. Di Fui was happy and baffled at the same time by his wife's sudden change. What surprised him was the decrease in his spiritual power every time they had sex. Anyone would easily overlook the slight decline, but not Di Fui. Being an acute observer, he noticed the difference the third time they had sex. When they were nearing the climax of their lovemaking, Di Fui purposely observed the condition of her body and finally caught a slight movement of the evil being. The devil was quietly absorbing his yang energy from his body. The thing seemed to be already alive. It seemed to have noticed Di Fui's suspicion, so it immediately withdrew itself to avoid being discovered.